I'm so happy you're bringing it up. Fantastic, Shane. It's a mutual appreciation society. Fantastic.
Hi, I'm Shane Buettner of Intervention Records. I am in Paris, and I'm fortunate enough to be sitting here with Murray Head, and we're going to talk about his groundbreaking 1972 album, Nigel Lived, which Intervention Records will be releasing in a beautiful gatefold with a book, double 45, and we're really happy to be here with Murray.
Thank you very much, Shane.
So this is made in quote-unquote old style way, where the front cover and the back cover are one flat sheet of paper.
Oh, yes.
The exterior is another flat sheet, and they print them out as whole sheets, so it's all on one sheet, but then they cut it, and then it's actually wrapped around cardboard blanks. But, you know, the lengths to which they went at recreating the correct look and feel for the paper stock.
It's fantastic stuff.
And, you know, they noticed that, see, they apparently back then, they didn't have as many environmental regulations. They were able to use glues that were very strong that they can't use today. And they noticed that when it was glued in, it actually went over some of the artwork.
Yes.
And, you know, they did their best, and they noticed, because they needed to glue it like that to get a weaker glue at a larger thing. So they did move it just a little bit so that they would miss, you know, as little as possible.
You just missed that one there, which is, I hope everything is going fine with you, which it's not.
What came first, the story of Nigel and then the songs?
What came first was about 2 or 3 people dying of heroin addiction, contemporaries, and then more, and me thinking, it's so weird that we're being continually told by the media how lucky we are. This is the expression we were made to live with was, "You've never had it so good," which is Harold Macmillan quoted that. Shortly after that, there was the Profumo scandal with Christine Keeler, where it was suddenly, for the first time, the English public learnt about what the aristocracy do in their spare time, which is probably all the time, and that they all cavorted around having orgies with Russian spies and God knows what else, all thrown into boot. And for the first time, the elder generation looked like a bunch of schmucks. They really looked bad. And so "You've Never Had It So Good" started to pale. In the north, you can have dreams of going to London, but the danger is that you do not come completely equipped to deal with whatever you come up against. You can be lucky and make even a fortune, as some people did with clothes shops or various things that people of our age or contemporaries were doing and succeeding in.
And that's Nigel's story.
And that's Nigel. He comes from the small town to the city, and it all looks really easy. It all looks, it's all handed on a plate. But then slowly it turns, and it struck me as being, I was also influenced by because I was drawing a lot in those days. I can't remember whether it was my parents who put it my way, but Hogarth had written a thing in cartoons of latter day of London at the time. It's probably around about the late 1700s, possibly the start of the 19th century, and it was called The Rake's Progress. And you watch this man who is rich and doing really well in the first few pictures, and then slowly but surely he ends up much worse than if you hadn't have done anything. He ends up in Bedlam, which is the lunatic asylum, which is where people who were bankrupt ended up. And in the process you see Gin Alley, and you see all the hardest, cruelest side of London, the East End, and those that scrape a living, and how, what little entertainment they get, they have to make their own, and it involves alcoholism, and it struck me as being the same sort of pattern. So this, in a way, is a Rake's progress of somebody who was never really a Rake. But he goes through all this, and there were so many elements in my personal life which corresponded that I thought, well, I'll just mix the two of us up, which is, I think, what a lot of writers do. Whenever I accuse, if I get the opportunity to accuse somebody of having put me in their story, I'm always answering the same. It's a composite. It's not just you. There's a bit of you in there, but you're not the nasty bits. It's just and you go, yeah, pull the other one. The way of doing it would be to understand this person's life and to be closer to reality and an honesty. Write a diary, the diary he would have written, and then maybe somebody like a songwriter, myself, would come across this diary, select various lines in the week, and then write a song around those lines, because those lines personified what he was going through.
So the idea was that you, the songwriter, found Nigel's diary.
You got it. That's it. And
it's almost like these found footage movies that
yes,
today. The idea
exactly.
Like, I found a camera that's full of this story, and then
absolutely. And the only trouble is that the only thing I can guarantee is about 60% me or 70% me, and therefore that gives it a tinge of reality. It's a world confronted already by advancing technology, but with hankerings towards something more romantic. And to put it in the nutshell, the schools that I went to, by the time I got to the grammar school, which is the top end, it was the driest of the educations that I got, and it was appalling. It was abysmal. It gave me no encouragement at all. And they were looking for engineers, scientists. Anybody who was into art was a waste of time. And so, typically, if you look into it, you look into the back histories, you'll find an enormous amount of musicians and bands came from art college, because that was the only way, a place to express. And so, we were at a college doing our A-levels to get into university, and we were looking for romance, and we found it in derelict houses. To me, there was something quite symbolic in the fact that I didn't find a diary in there, but I found everything else. I found letters and all sorts of fabulous things in the past.
So it's like looking through people's lives.
But because it's a derelict, it's everybody's, and it's a moving palette. And what happened was that when I first went there, which is on the first side of this, it was fabulous. I was a minstrel, etc., etc., etc. It was a fantastic feeling. But it was so frightening how quickly that changed to tramps and serious junkies who really soured the atmosphere.
So when Nigel came to the city and got a job, this is a little more of the experience you had.
Yeah,
with
that's
the
it.
derelict queen
Yeah. Yeah. It's in there somewhere, I think. And then at the end, what you don't want is it's no longer the comfortable, jolly, all round a campfire singing, hootenanny. It suddenly turns into this far darker and more sinister place where people are dealing and people are scoring, and people are just about making it.
This is like a 3-act play in terms of the dramatic arc of the character. I mean, he goes to the big city, he experiences success, and then there's just a tremendous downfall.
Well, I owe it to very few people. I owe it to, as much as I owe it to you now for recognising it. Out there, they're in a very, very, very small minority, but there are people who understand. And this would not have been possible without their considerable help. Scott Shukat at William Morris, he's dead now, as I wrote to you, all the people involved were dead. He was the bright one who said, I know who this is going to work with. And he took me straight to John Hammond. We didn't waste any time. And you had to go through Clive Davis, who was very much in power at the time. And there are things that I didn't recognise would eventually be hindrances. If I'd have known about the hindrances, because that's the kind of upbringing I had, my parents didn't want to ever congratulate me or praise me on anything in case it broke down, and they felt that the misery would be far worse than... But no, it was quite a strange upbringing. I mean, I got that out of them finally at one point, that why they never praised me. I said, you know what, you're going to have an up and you're going to have a down at some moment, so, that's what this is about. So why not face the reality, And the hindrances were silly little things like, because I signed to America, I would think that the people in England, when they had this, hadn't a clue. I didn't feel any responsibility to it whatsoever, because I hadn't grown up in their ranks. I hadn't, although I'd done Superstar, as far as that was, they were concerned, Superstar was not a success in England. The single of Jesus Christ Superstar got
So
number
you
13.
got signed in America, but then you made the album with the UK.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it wasn't enough of a global thing for people to recognise on both sides the importance of that. The other mistake was not ever finding out that nobody in America, not one of the 300 million, are called Nigel. Nobody has ever used the word Nigel in America. And of course, in that context, do you say Nigel lived? Nigel? 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 You wouldn't know. So there's silly little things that have an enormous bearing on the fate of this poor old
so
thing.
So they're called Jim or Freddie lived or Tommy.
Mine is still a better chance. They're Tommy, not Tommy, no.
Tommy, yeah, I guess.
Tommy's friend. Yeah, would have done all right. All these places existed. I was forced to find some kind of...
now, these pictures from the derelict, or these your own?
These are... that's a friend of mine opened this club. It lasted a week, called Why Not? Because the lavatories overflowed.
Plumbing can take down any business.
Joel, who was in Hair with me, who was a great mate, I loved him dearly, he ended up playing for Bob Marley. And I tried to get him, when I was in Jamaica, at long last I'm in Jamaica, and the only person I know, Junior, I'll give him a ring. No, you don't give him a ring. it's you would have thought that he was uptight about somebody listening on, it's a gun country. They're all nutty over there, and he was not the Junior I knew. He changed.
Check and make sure that's the timer's still running. I'm pretty sure it is. I just want to double check.
We're getting your editor a lot. It's great. This.
See a time counter.
It's my feet. Sorry.
Let me just double check. There you go. I got it.
I can't tell if it's...
Oh yeah. Perfect.
This.
We're still in the viewfinder, both of us.
This is a photograph of the Stones at Hyde Park. It's a Hyde Park concert when he came on in a dress and released thousands of butterflies. It was really good, great concert. I was there, and that's my picture. This is my first job, working in the reservoirs. That's my first pay packet, and I came home with £18, no less, a lot less. Remember, £12, £12.10. That's it. That's what I came home with.
Phil Brown, the engineer in the project, talked about the early meetings you had at Toad Hall, your flat in London, where you started kind of planning.
That's what I'm being kicked out of now. It's the same place. Yeah.
But that's kind of where you started talking about these ideas, and the ideas apparently came up to do these location recordings, and to.
Oh, that was definitely on my mind. It was like, there was a link between, if I'm going to go for reality, diaries, something that really happened, and the story around it, and the songs are going to be the objectivity behind that, and this is the subjective. I need a link orally as much as I've got one written. And so the live sound was quite early on. I mean, I think we covered that really well. I would have almost suggested if I just did the first song, that would have been, and then the rest of them would have fallen into place and come on the back of it. But the station, my local station, Hampton, was a joy. We start with a kestrel, which is, you know, it is an aspect of the country coming into town. You know, the kestrel is Hampton is a suburb.
So this is before
The footsteps on the
pacing
thing.
on the station.
That's it. And then the station master who talks about old steam trains. I mean, you know, you don't get that often. Oh, the fish plates and all that is going on about the
But
fish
that
plates.
was always your conception of the album was going to be that it was this, you were going for as much reality as you could, and part of that was
Yeah.
really getting into environments and not being
Yeah.
confined to a studio.
Yes. It's not just, it's the fact that, you know, yes, I'm looking for a link. It was instinctive more than anything else, but I have to say that we went with a Stellavox to the station and everything fell into place. The thing that was the most exciting aspect of that first track was the metal doors, which barely exist any longer on the train. First of all, you've got the whine of the engine pulling out, and you've got these doors that shut with the slam, and it's a most extraordinary percussively. And at first I thought, oh, I'll never, God, it's going to be really hard making the tape fit to the rhythm of the track. No, there is percussion in everything natural. It's all there. You don't have to find it. You don't have to juggle it. It's there. It does itself. And I mean, Pete played the piano to this thing going, and it was just superb. Absolutely superb. I couldn't have asked for anything better. And from then on, we realised, you know, it doesn't matter. It'll fit. It's you don't.
So that first recording and location you did encouraged you to do more, that it was going to fit, that it was going to work, and that...
Yeah, it became very exciting. It gave a depth. I mean, it is. There weren't that many people were just writing pop songs. I certainly liked King Crimson, and I liked even more the album that Mike Giles went on to make with his friend, I think it's Ian MacDonald, I don't know, it's called MacDonald and Giles. It's a really interesting album. And I said, who was playing bass on that, Mike? Because I got Mike, that was okay, he agreed to do it. I didn't realise how fastidious he was, but never mind, we got that. And he said, oh, it's my brother, he played bass, but he's retired. I said, what, retired at 20 or 23? I mean, good God. Yes, he's a solicitor now. I said, well, do you fancy getting him out of retirement? No, you're joking. I said, no, I'm not joking. I really, really like his bass playing, and it would suit this piece perfectly, you know. And it was that piece is very much cobbled together in pieces and different sections and that. It's a very complicated chunk. It's quite a sort of, it's got things that come back and go back.
I called it the 3-act play within the 3-act play.
Yeah, it is.
Really gets into
Yeah,
different sections
yeah,
that are
absolutely.
fascinating.
Absolutely.
And then it ends on that just beautiful, uplifting.
Empty sort of, but honest.
Well, you mentioned Steve Miller. I mean, one of the things I was going to ask you about is, you know, the acoustic numbers. You know, feel like there's a direct line between that and some of your later albums, like some of the songs in Say It Ain't So and stuff like that. When Nigel's in the city, though, there's just a dense urban sound to some of those songs. The bass is heavy. I was going to ask you what music you were listening to at the time that you brought to that part of it, because.
Well, I was, you know, I don't know whether it was yet, but Herbie Hancock, Headhunters, Stanley Clark, the Miles, there's some
Jazz?
of the Bitches
When jazz
Brew,
went
yeah,
rock and
yeah,
roll,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah,
That
Bitches
makes
Brew,
complete sense.
fabulous.
Because that period of Miles' career, I mean, that is heavy.
And justifiably so. I mean, you know, he was saying, "You want me to be serious? Well, take this." And it was he was a beacon throughout all our lives. His constant search for change. My father knew I was into music to a certain extent. He knew, and so for my 13th or 12th birthday, he bought me 2 second-hand records. Second-hand means, I don't know what you have in
Used. We're just going to use it.
One was
Vintage.
a Swedish saxophonist called Serge Chaloff, and he had Leroy Vinegar playing bass and Philly Judges on the drums, and it was nice. It was breathy. It was close to the chest, and there were good songs, and he'd done a good job. I liked it. The other one was fucking horrible. It was a sort of brass blast, and he just bought it because of the covers. So I thought, okay, it's not quite what I want. And so I went out and I spent the rest of my birthday money on The Most of Miles, which was the first time a compilation. In 1960, he already had a compilation album with the two brothers, Adderley brothers on one side, and the Jill Evans orchestrations for Porgy and Bess and Maids of Cadiz and what about it, Spain? Spanish sketches. Absolutely astounding. Their orchestral arrangements would haunt me to my death. And you know, the joke of it was he saw me bringing it. He said, "What do you got there? It's a record, isn't it?" I said, "Yes." "You've got 2 already. What do you want?" And it was like, "I got 2 records, and that's enough for anybody with a collection. It's a collection." And he didn't understand. It's what's in it, Dad. It's not quite just the cover. Miles was really, really deep in my conscience. I would have been 14, 15. I had my brother had a nanny, and her brother played trad jazz, and so I got trad jazz first, and I realised the limitations and all. I liked it. I enjoyed extemporisation, I enjoyed the freedom, but there was something that was limiting, and so modern jazz was a perfect continuance. But then, you're limited to what you can do, and the reason all my stuff's acoustic is because that's what I can do. I can play on an acoustic guitar. I don't want to pretend to do anything else. I can put songs together. I can find the rhythm. I've got a peculiar rhythm. Such a peculiar rhythm that we needed to listen to the masters of Say It Ain't So, the Say It Ain't So album, because I was doing it for an ad or something, and we put it up on the thing on the Atari, and it was like, first shock was to find that all the faders, this was way before automatic faders, all the faders were absolutely in line, which is in itself, whoa. You know, you can't get more precise than that. It was really lovely. And then this strange track that we could not put our fingers on it. What it was, what the fuck is that? It's sort of vaguely rhythmic. And I realised that Paul, in order to get the sound of my thumb strumming, which is more Latin than anything else, the only way of getting that is if we rub our hands together. So it's a load of men around a microphone trying to imitate the rhythmic sound of my thing, on, you know, to blend in with the guitars. It worked, it's good. So I met them as we went along. Mark Warner was collared pretty early on. I bumped into him while I was doing Sunday Bloody Sunday. On a very auspicious day when it was, we were, for one of the few occasions we were out on location on Putney Heath, and they put the locations manager said, "I've got you a place to change, you're really lovely." And I said, "Yeah, it's your cup of tea." And I went, "Oh, good, thanks, someone's caring for once." Went into the garden, there was an enormous peace sign on the window. You know, I was like, "Oh, right, okay." She bung me in a room full of hippies, and they were Americans. They'd just come over, and what they were doing in Putney, I don't know. But they were all sitting around in a circle at sort of 10 o'clock in the morning and playing songs, obviously wanting to be heard and all that sort of. Mark Warder was among them. And he was good, and I liked the way he heard things. And somebody passed me a joint, and it was so second nature. I passed it on. Oh fuck. Oh fuck, I've got to do a scene in a minute. And the wardrobe lady was opposite me, and she thought it was the funniest thing that she'd ever seen. An actor fighting not to be stoned. And it was on top of which it was good grass. It was Durban poison, they used to call it, came from South Africa. And it was a scene where I had to go out and push a pram with Glenda Jackson on the heath, and the dog runs off, and then the lorry kills the dog.
Oh.
And the first thing I noticed, which was quite interesting, as I walked out to the pram I was supposed to push, and I'm about 50 yards away from the crew behind the camera. And because I was stoned, you notice things you don't normally notice. And I thought, fucking hell, it's all a game. They're all playing. They're so bored, they've all got time to do things to me. They're playing with prop toys for the children, lighting each other underneath the seat, you know, with the lighter to make the person jump, throwing darts at each other. Everybody's got something they're doing that's nothing to do with the bloody film. And except right in the middle is the wardrobe lady pissing herself in laughter because she knows what I'm going through, pushing this pram, you know, trying to look natural and normal, and then I have to run for the van and the thing, and of course stoned, the driver comes around the back and I'm supposed to go, you know, I'm supposed to react, and nobody told me what they wanted, so stoned you go, oh, what have you done? Oh, you know, and I'm supposed to come and I say, what the fuck are you doing? You're not telling me, what are you driving around the corner at 450 miles an hour? I'm going to get you, mate, I'm going to ring up the police. No. I just caved in, I went, oh dear, how tragic, oh that's awful. So he was furious, and we had to reshoot.
So this wasn't one of those happy accidents where...
No.
They like the way you did it stoned.
Help. No. No, it doesn't add to the aggressive instinct. It's the opposite. It was very funny, but I mean, the point is that's where I met Mark.
It is a story, and the story ends with Religion, the song, and then with Junk, which if people remember, it's interesting that if people remember one song from this album, critics and everybody else liked, Junk made an impression on people.
Really?
Felt like they'd never. Oh yeah.
Good gracious.
Yeah.
That was the last thing I expected. I was expecting people that, okay, so take it off.
The other songs are beautiful, but Junk is the one thing that virtually everybody says they never heard anything quite like it.
I hadn't. I had all these riffs that sort of spelt out the euphoric side and the you know, I mean, well, it's a big composition. It was quite a bit of weaving to do. And I mean, nobody'd heard Pigs at that point. Nobody knew what they sounded like. I thought they were fantastic. There are two sounds that have got done to death now. One is Badgers and Foxes in the Night, which is a horrible scream. And the other is Pigs. You hear them everywhere now. It's a sort of... things get used. People get aware. It's not used the way you live, yes. Hardest step to take in existence. So your mind is hanging back with persistence. Will you ever be certain that there's anything at all behind the curtain of religion? I came away as a youngster quite disillusioned, in the sense that I had the fervour that anybody would have. I think a messianic complex means that you think you're Christ. I'm not sure, but I didn't think I was. But there were two subjects which, as I was aiming for a world in which I was going to paint, or I was aiming to do art at university. The first pictures I started painting at 11, or the two subjects that I wasn't even aware of that they was recurring and they were that important to me, but were Don Quixote and Christ on the Cross. I think I'd probably be moved by the Dali one, which is quite good, the one above, which is quite effective. But they definitely turn out in all the sort of sketches and paintings, and I realise now I was actually ready for it, in the sense that my parents had not baptised me to allow me the choice of what religion I wanted, which was pretty forward-thinking of them in 1946 or whatever it was. So I had you could actually say that I had leanings towards Protestantism, I suppose. Just out of curiosity, looking for a support system. It seemed to be the official one that everybody, clung to. It's, we bought a house next to a church. We had gravestones on two sides of our house. And so I went along to the reverend, to ask about confirmation. And there were confirmation classes. So I went along to confirmation classes and I said, the trouble is I'm not baptised. He said, oh, that's all right.
When is this?
This was about 11 or 12.
Okay.
And I said, oh, I was thinking about being confirmed. The trouble is I'm not baptised. And he said, oh, that's all right, we can do the two at the same time. All right,
Two
okay,
for one.
fine, 2 for 1. So I then went through the classes, and there was a lot of stuff that seemed over elaborate, too complex. Ours next door was a high church, so at Christmas they do things in Latin, which meant nothing to me. And so I went along with it, and then came the time when we were supposed to all be in awe because the Bishop of York, I think it was coming down to do it, which is an enormous favour for him to travel this far, all the way down to little old Hampton to do it. And he said, you're going to be asked a series of questions tomorrow, to which you say, I do, I do, I do. And I said, and we all said, okay, fine, and then we went through it. And of course we touched on the inevitable problem of, the Immaculate Conception, which at that point I wasn't really prepared for because I just learned about how it happens in real life. So it seemed a little, I wasn't quite ready for it. So he said, has anybody got any questions? And I put my hand up, and of course he said the inevitable. I might have expected it over your head. Yeah, all right, okay, but it's this Immaculate Conception business. I find it very hard to say when he asks you, do you believe in the Immaculate? I can't find it easy to say, I do. He said, oh, for goodness sake, Murray, it's quite simple. You just accept it now. You'll find out about it later. And that was it. I was gobsmacked. I just thought, I can't believe that a man of the faith could tell me to lie to the Bishop of London because I'll understand it at a later date. That's how Germany got away with what it got away with, And so, well, I was furious, and I thought, if that is religion, all you're doing is counting the flock. All you're doing is notching up successes. I don't want to be part of your particular game, and I was very disillusioned. So this is a few days later, but I'm not feeling any different. I felt, I didn't feel that faith. I had, by this time, I'd had to develop my own creed, my basis. Yeah, on a really simple level. Will you ever be certain that there's anything at all behind the curtain of religion? If there's a more to life than self-preservation, should I really put myself to begin? Should I live for tomorrow? Or another life that seems more hollow than religion? It's not there to share what I have missed. Esoterics for freak generics. Listen to me, I've tried Sufi. What do you know? Well, what do you know? What do you know? They tell me that religion isn't such a new thing. It started many years ago. Don't you ever need to ask them what the hell they were doing? Did they really crucify their God just for show? Get baptized or you will never be buried. Yes, that always haunted me. Before your heart and soul are being ferried by Archara and St. Peter, bunging a bit of mythology, be sure that you stock up on your wheat with religion. Now, it's a comment. It's obviously something that's part of, when it was offered as a support, and I don't think it's a sufficiently. What's interesting is this is it was written pre the influence of Oriental medicine, Oriental religion and spirituality, and before we got in touch with Buddhism. But I mean, even then, the number of people who were going to India, to ashrams, it was clear that they'd do it for a while, but they weren't, it wasn't part of their culture, they were laying it on. And I remember at the time there was one of the American gurus, I think it was Baba Ramdas, I'm not sure. So there I was in Benares, looking at all these old people, staggering along with their 2 rupees to be burnt, and in ghastly state. Oh, the poverty of it all. It was terrible. And I suddenly realised they were looking at me as though I was the one who needed to be walking with them, and I realised what they were thinking was, poor fucker, he's got a long time to go still, and they're free in the next day or so. They're and it's true. It's there's a lot to learn. And I know a lot of people were disappointed. A lot of people tried it. A lot of people, and you could just see they were just steeped in materialism, and there was no way in which it could help them. But at least, things were moving. And I think, and what's interesting is how much America contributed to that. There were some good thoughts being put out, and there were some good people. To me, you mentioned, where you were all coming from and what it was before your time in a way, but to me, the ultimate was the Chicago 8. And Ken Kesey's lot, and
the Mary Pranksters.
Abby Hoffman, the Mary Pranksters and Abby Hoffman. And I knew people who knew the Mary Pranksters. I stayed on a commune in Albany, so all that was going around, and I had the extraordinary good fortune in a tiny theatre in Shepherd's Bush to see William Burroughs playing Judge Hoffman and reading out the whole of the Chicago trial to them. Wow. It was fantastic. He was so good. You've no idea how good he was. The dry, caustic tone. And so, I think religion is just to say that, it's okay for some, but it ain't any help here.
I guess it's important, yes, that it came before John Canada.
He's got no help whatsoever. There's nothing, there's no support system. I think, to a minor extent, it was endorsed by the fact that the woman I fell in love with, unconditionally, claimed, I think she'd only been out 8 months. She'd been to it wasn't called a mental health, at the age of 14 to 12 or something. Her brother was a Down syndrome, older than her, and obviously it affected the attention she was getting at home. And so she was a problem to her parents. They took her out of school and put her in a place called not Bethlehem first, Bethlehem, which is the old Bedlam. And after that she went to the Maudsley, which is a very sort of intellectual, a very highbrow psycho unit of some sorts. And the third time, before I met her about 8 months afterwards, I think, I didn't realise it was so early, so quickly afterwards, they put her in a place called Cane Hill, which is a Victorian mental institution with locked wards. And she had the common sense to not take the pills and hide them. But her parents had allowed the doctor, and the doctor had done it to teach her a lesson, to put her on the locked ward, which I thought, as a young man, I just thought that I can't believe anybody could be doing this today, in this day and age. And some of her stories of all that sort of roll around my brain, and she knew junkies in hospital, I knew junkies in hospital, and I knew how hard it was to
Get off it.
You can't get off it. They discovered methadone quite shortly after this, and the methadone works to a certain extent. I said that the interest was in science and all that, and so therefore a lot of us ended up in art school, and that's where bands were formed, because it was another form of expression. With that came this thing which has to be explained, even to America, which is that expressing oneself in song, there's nothing like the kick. I mean, I learned very early on not to play stuff that I've recently written to anybody. What I do, once I put the music and the lyrics together for the first time properly, I sit and listen to that like an old tosser, getting excited on his own thing for probably about a month or two before I let anybody else hear it. As soon as somebody else hears it, it's their opinion, it's their song. It doesn't belong to me any longer. It's gone. It's all finished. And because I want to maintain the soul of what we do, of what I do, I've seen it evaporate from the 80s onwards. It was, and why? Because the record companies were so slow to pick up. They were still depending on the classical music. In the, as late as late 60s, they were still depending on the classical catalogue, although it was, individually it was smaller, but there were conductors, there's the pieces, there's the soloists, there's so much in the classical thing you can depend on that. They didn't give the credit they should have given, but thank God they didn't, to rock and roll, which allowed rock and roll to breathe, function, go ahead without any thought of money. I was talking to somebody the other day who...
Phil said that. He said, Nigel, he doesn't remember anybody ever talking about a budget or anything else. That you just went off and did the record.
No, they tell me about the budget afterwards. They said 14 grand, and I thought, oh my God. But by that time it's too late. That's good. But I mean, that's it. You do not, that's why you say, can I do this today? No, of course I can't. Because there's some completely unnecessary person saying, well, I don't think you do that because that's going to cost. And it's, the unnecessary people multiplied and multiplied and multiplied, and soon these great big behemoths of industry, it's sort of like with thousands and thousands of people who are not actually doing a very good job, I remember reading an article by an A&R man in Time Out in the late 80s, I think it was. I think he was from A&M. He was so proud of the fact he'd seen 500 bands and not signed one of them. He'd saved the record company a fortune. I mean, and that was prevalent throughout the industry. Now, when I say that kids have got to understand today, you know, have a passion. That's the only thing I ask of any child. If you can find what really turns you on, stick to it, because you can then go through being famished, you can then go through having no money and fighting for a living, because you'll do it for what you're passionate about. And we all did that at the time. We did. This guy I met the other day who was a road manager for the first Jimi Hendrix tour. You know, he's telling me that in New York, Jimmy came into his office and said, Dave, the money we make from all the tickets, where does it go? Well, tomorrow I bank it, Jimmy, and then it goes off to the trust fund and wherever it is, on what island. He said, why? He said, oh, I see. Do you think I could have some of that? Could I have some money, do you think? He said, Jimmy, it's your money. You've earned it. Don't be silly. You could ask for what do you want? Well, could I have $500? Of course you can, Jimmy. Anything you want. Anything? $750? Yes. We didn't have the fucking clue about how much money was going because we trusted everybody. Record companies didn't get dishonest till the late 60s, early 70s, and then they caught on. And then from that moment, the accountants came in the 1980s, and once the accountants were here, we didn't even have a fucking name. We had a number.
Right.
We had, and we were all numbers. And from that moment on, it was, you know, then the synthesizer, the industry started selling equipment. You know, a child could have something his parents had bought him, press a red button, and a song would emerge. You know, it got really ludicrous, and it hasn't really changed. It's still about a lot of people who are making money on the back of other people who have good imaginations.
I just want to thank you for all your time, for being so kind. I licensed this title directly from Murray. It's been an absolute dream. And I just want to say this project means the world to me because it came directly from you. And I just am, you know, so happy to be giving this record, a great record, to a new audience and a new generation.
So, my God.
I didn't know they'd be out there to exist. It's fantastic. But you've done what is really good. Is what you've done, which is not the case normally, is you have ameliorated it enormously. By giving it two records to cover up for what I did at the time. I knew nothing about audio, anything, and I went ahead and did 29 minutes. Which meant that there's no bass at the end, hardly at all.
The second side of the original LP was over 28 minutes.
28, yeah.
Which means the only way that you can actually cut that to fit is you have to drop the level a lot, and you have to filter the bass, because that takes up the groove space.
And it was Michael Giles's bass brother playing bass. He'd just come out of retirement to do it. And I mean, you know, there I was taking it all away. It's terrible. But I mean,
so
what is really fantastic is that you, a million miles away, somebody I've never met, suddenly lights on something that I honestly thought was a bygone, and what's important about it is it's there to show that once it's done, it can resurface 300 years later. It doesn't matter, it's been done. So, to anybody out there, get it done. Get it in print, get it on wax